She always believed their future was set in gentle stone. 2 marriages, 2 quiet love stories, and a lifetime of carefully folded memories. But a single envelope from Krakow, bearing a surname she hasn't used in decades, is about to unravel everything she thought she knew. Now, after 82 years of living in someone else's narrative, she holds a Polish railway ticket dated 1947, a clue that points to a husband the world told her was dead, and a past she long buried in silence. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more. Eleanor Whitaker sat in the hush of her small Yorkshire cottage, the late afternoon sun drifting through lace curtains that had once brightened a busier home. It was spring of 1995, though the season's warmth seemed slow to settle in her bones. She was 82, and since losing her second husband barely 6 months ago, her days felt weighted by echoes. The house was modest but cozy, with walls scuffed by time and a faint scent of lavender polish lingering in every room. She often moved from one corner to another, dusting shelves that held old photographs or oiling the hinges of doors that no longer saw much use. That afternoon, she had spread out her late husband's war medals on the small dining table, each pinned to a faded strip of cloth. The medals caught glints of sunlight, reminding her of ceremonies long past and the crisp uniforms he used to wear in his youth. Her fingers moved carefully, tracing the raised outlines. She was no stranger to war's burdens. Born at a time when the world reeled from one conflict and stumbled into another, she had seen bombed-out streets and ration lines, had heard the whistles of sirens that scattered families into underground shelters. She had also known love twice. The first time was a lifetime ago with a man named William Hartley. The second was with a gentle soul named Harold Whitaker, whom she had married many years after William vanished. That day, she had intended to pack away Harold's medals in a trunk that bore scuffs from decades of travel. She pulled out the trunk from beneath her bed, a leather suitcase with brass latches, and set it near the dining table so she could decide how best to arrange the items inside. When she opened the trunk, she found an old lining that seemed to be peeling away from the edges. She ran her fingertips along the material, felt brittle, ready to tear if handled too roughly. Harold's medals lay neatly atop the clothes she had kept for sentimental reasons. His uniform jacket, a wool sweater he wore in winter. As she tugged at the worn lining, an envelope slipped out, landing on the floor with a soft thud. She leaned down, her heart drumming with sudden unease. The postmark read Krakow, spelled in a script that seemed foreign and heavily smudged. Her gaze caught the name inked on the front. Miss Eleanor Hartley. The letters jolted her, a name that felt like a relic from another existence. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in decades. For a moment, she simply stared, the hush of the cottage deepening around her. Then she slowly picked it up, trying to steady her trembling hand. She had no memory of ever seeing such an envelope, let alone placing it in Harold's suitcase. The edges were yellowed, and the date on the postmark appeared to be from the early 1970s, though much of it was too faded to read clearly. She slipped a finger beneath the flap and gently pried it open. Inside, folded with military-like precision, was a railway ticket from 1947, printed in Polish. Accompanying it was a small, grainy black-and-white photograph. The image showed an RAF uniformed man she recognized instantly, even though nearly half a century had passed. William Hartley, her first husband. Her breath caught. The photograph's corners were frayed, the figures slightly blurred by time, but there was no mistaking that strong jaw and alert eyes she used to trace lovingly when they were newlyweds. In his arms, he held a baby with a round face and wide eyes. It was a child Eleanor had never seen before, a child she certainly hadn't birthed. Her knees threatened to buckle. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, her gaze locked on William's face. Memories flickered. The day they married under a gentle sun in a small church, the brief honeymoon spent in a cottage overlooking the moors, the sense of excitement and hope they carried like a torch in those early days. Then, 3 weeks after the wedding, he vanished in the middle of the night. No note, no body ever found. No official explanation beyond hushes and rumors. Everyone said it was desertion, She had spent decades wrestling with that word, trying to reconcile it with the man who once looked at her with the softest devotion. Now, at 82, she found him staring back from a photograph where he clutched a baby she didn't recognize. Her heart pounded as she recalled the confusion of those first weeks after his disappearance. The police came, took statements, searched for any sign of him. Neighbors whispered theories of him running off with someone else, or perhaps going rogue. Some in her family didn't want to mention his name again. Eventually, she buried her confusion under the assumption that something dark had happened. War does strange things to people. She moved on with her life, married Harold many years later, and quietly stowed the heartbreak in a corner of her mind. Now, the unanswered questions roared back to life, demanding to be heard. She sank into a chair, the envelope still clutched in her grip. That evening, she tried to eat dinner but found she had no appetite. The black and white photo lay on the table before her, illuminated by a single lamp. She traced William's face again and again, tears slipping down her cheeks as she wondered who the baby was, and why William had been in Poland after the war. She had known he was involved in some post-war work, possibly intelligence, but official records always came back inconclusive. She recalled that when she sought information in the late 1940s, the authorities told her they had no knowledge of any special assignment. The possibility of a secret life in Poland never crossed her mind, at least not until now. She called her nephew Roger, who lived 2 towns over, and tried to explain what she had found. Roger listened politely, but he was busy with his own family and seemed unsure what to say. "Auntie, I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's been so many years. Maybe best to let it lie." She felt frustration rise. How could she let this lie when a photograph showed William very much alive, in uniform, holding a child? She ended the call with a forced goodnight, her fingers shaking around the phone's receiver. In the days that followed, she found herself taking the photograph out repeatedly, examining every inch. She noticed a faint sign in the background, words that looked Polish. She tried to decipher them with an old dictionary from her shelf. The process was slow and incomplete, but she gleaned references to a location near Krakow. Each fresh detail heightened the feeling that she had wasted decades believing a half-truth. At times, she wanted to push the envelope and tick it back into the trunk and forget it existed. But the pull to know, to truly know, was stronger than fear. Nights were the worst. She would lie in bed, feeling every creak of the house, remembering the last night she spent with William. She had fallen asleep believing their life together was just beginning, only to wake and find him gone. Part of her wanted to turn back the clock, to confront him with all the questions that now scorched her mind. Another part grieved anew, as if the wound had just been inflicted. She realized that none of her second husband's war stories or medals explained where this old Polish envelope had come from. The more she thought of it, the more convinced she became that Harold might have known something and never told her. Yet Harold was gone too, leaving her with nothing but the trunk and the brittle envelope. Eventually, she decided she had to act. She wrote a short letter addressed to an archive in Krakow, an address she found in a newspaper clipping about genealogical research. She included a photocopy of the railway ticket and photo with a polite inquiry. Did they have any record of a British soldier named William Hartley traveling under unusual circumstances in 1947? She felt a pang of embarrassment sending it. Sure, they would dismiss her as a senile widow chasing phantoms. But she was more terrified of doing nothing. Days stretched to weeks, and she heard nothing in return. She told no one of her letter, uncertain whether she wanted anyone to know she had reignited a mystery that was half a century old. She busied herself with daily tasks, brewing tea, knitting scarves, pottering about in her small garden. But beneath every quiet moment, the question burned. Why Poland? Why that baby in William's arms? And most importantly, why had no one told her? Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived bearing an international postmark. She recognized the foreign stamps, her pulse quickening as she tore it open. The letter was carefully typed and included a formal salutation in broken English. It identified the sender as an archivist at the Polish Institute of National Remembrance. They confirmed receipt of her inquiry and stated that partial records indicated a British individual named William Hartley might have entered Poland under an alias in 1947. The archivist promised a fuller report would follow once additional documents were reviewed. Eleanor's mind whirled. An alias? She reread the letter repeatedly, her heart thumping at the idea that William hadn't just left. He had apparently hidden behind a false identity. Her nephew Roger remained skeptical when she confided in him. "Auntie, are you sure you're not mixing up names? People can have doppelgangers." But she knew in her bones that this was no coincidence. The photograph was unmistakable, and the archivist's reference to an alias matched something she vaguely recalled in William's letters before they married. He had hinted at some hush-hush post-war work but never gave details. Despite Roger's caution, she pressed on, sending another letter to the archive. Over the next few weeks, she received sporadic communications, fragments of translations. Each letter hinted at something bigger, mentions of a stay-behind operation, references to British intelligence activity in Eastern Europe, a sub-operation called Project Embers. She barely understood these terms, but they sounded ominous. She decided to seek help from someone who might understand the labyrinth of wartime espionage. Through a contact at a local historical society, she was introduced to a British historian living in London, said to be an expert in Cold War intelligence. She phoned him, her voice trembling as she explained the basics of her story. They arranged to meet in a small cafe tucked away on a quiet London street. The historian was a middle-aged man with horn-rimmed glasses, dressed in a tweed jacket that made him look every bit the academic. Over a pot of tea, Eleanor showed him the photograph and the railway ticket. He listened intently, then pulled out a folder of his own. Inside were photocopies of documents stamped with the words restricted and classified. He explained that after the war, Britain and the newly formed CIA set up networks in various European countries, anticipating a possible Soviet expansion. Young men returning from the war, especially those with certain language skills, were prime candidates for covert recruitment. Many were not fully informed of the risks, or they were coerced. It was a messy chapter of intelligence history, seldom spoken about openly. Eleanor's head spun. She recalled William mentioning that he had studied a bit of Polish during the war for communication efforts, but she never imagined he'd be whisked into something so clandestine. The historian slid one photocopy across the table. The page mentioned a man named William Hartley, presumed Kia in 1949, though there was a faint handwritten note beneath that official statement. Presumed defected. Do not confirm death to spouse. Eleanor's stomach lurched. This was confirmation of a deliberate cover-up. She felt a surge of anger so fierce that she almost knocked over her teacup. How dare they lie to her all these years? And had William truly defected? Or was that simply a label used by intelligence agencies? As if sensing her tumult of emotion, the historian spoke gently. It's possible your husband never intended to abandon you. The system was chaotic. People were forced or threatened. Some were told to forget their previous lives for safety. It happened more often than we like to admit. She left that meeting with her mind ablaze, carrying the photocopies close to her chest. She walked London's streets in a kind of daze, recalling her wedding day again. She wondered if William had glimpsed a future they could never share. Back in Yorkshire, she pored over every detail in those documents. References to aliases, safe houses in Krakow, hush-hush infiltration missions. She began to see how a man in William's position, young with basic knowledge of Polish, could be roped into a clandestine plan. This was bigger than just desertion. It was the shifting of entire nations, the hush of a new kind of war that had only just begun. Every time she pictured that child in William's arms, she felt a stab of jealousy and confusion. Had he started a new family? Or was it some child he rescued? Nothing was clear. All she knew was that the official story of his disappearance was a lie. Her family's responses varied. Roger expressed mild concern for her well-being, worried that she was dredging up trauma for no reason. A few neighbors, close to her age, urged her to let sleeping dogs lie. But Eleanor, with quiet resolve, continued sending letters to various archives, rummaging through old war references in the local library, and scanning the piles of papers the historian had given her. One evening, she discovered the mention of a contact in Warsaw who specialized in British intelligence footprints during the post-war period. She dashed off a letter, uncertain if she would ever hear back. A fortnight later, an airmail envelope arrived, addressed in neat handwriting. Inside was a translated letter from a woman named Anna Kowalska. Anna stated she had seen Eleanor's inquiries through certain channels in Poland. She wrote that her own mother, Danuta, had passed away recently and left behind a box of wartime artifacts. Among them were photographs of a British man called Marek Ostrowski, though Anna suspected that was not his real name. One photo was nearly identical to the one Eleanor possessed. The same man in an RAF uniform, the same baby in his arms. Anna believed the man known as Marek was actually William Hartley. She asked Eleanor to come to Warsaw, insisting there were more things best not sent across the sea. Eleanor's pulse thudded with renewed intensity. So William had indeed lived in Poland. Anna was about 47, which might mean she was born in the late 1940s. The possibility that she was William's daughter took hold like a living thing. That would make her, in a strange way, Eleanor's stepdaughter or daughter, depending on how the timeline overlapped. The thought both frightened and thrilled her. She stared at the letter, weighing the enormity of traveling so far at her age. Then she imagined letting this final chance slip away. She couldn't do it. Her grandson, a kind but pragmatic man in his early 30s, helped her arrange the trip. He guided her through booking a plane ticket, renewing her passport, and preparing for a journey she had once deemed impossible. She had not boarded a flight in over 2 decades, and the mere thought of stepping into an airport made her hands tremble. Still, she pressed on. There was a part of her, a younger, daring part, that yearned to stand in the places William had stood, to see with her own eyes what had become of him. On a crisp morning, she found herself in the bustling chaos of the airport, clutching her carry-on bag and the folder of documents that contained every shred of evidence about William. Her grandson accompanied her through check-in, hugging her tight at the gate. She settled into the airplane seat, heart pounding as the engines roared to life. The sky outside the window shifted from pale blue to the deep expanse of clouds as she left behind the familiar English countryside. In that moment, she felt the weight of decades lifting and transforming into something else. Hope, maybe, or the unstoppable momentum of long-buried truths. When she landed in Warsaw, the air felt cooler than she expected, and the language around her was a flurry of consonants and unfamiliar cadences. She followed signs with the help of a translation card, eventually stepping into the arrivals hall where a woman around middle age, dark-haired and poised, held a small sign that read Eleanor. They regarded each other from a few steps away, both uncertain, both wearing the tentative smile of people who sense they share something profound. The woman introduced herself as Anna Kowalska. They stood there in the airport, the swirl of travelers streaming around them, locked in a silent assessment. Anna had eyes of a steely gray, reminiscent of the photographs of William. Her expression hinted at a reserved warmth, as though she, too, was unsure how to proceed. After a moment, she reached out and gently squeezed Eleanor's hands. They exchanged formalities, but behind each word lay a flood of questions neither knew how to ask yet. Anna led her outside to a waiting taxi. The city streets flashed by, modern buildings mixed with older Soviet-era blocks, and monuments to history that Eleanor recognized from wartime newsreels. During the drive, Anna spoke softly in English, explaining that her mother, Danuta, had passed away a few months earlier. In sorting through Danuta's things, Anna found a shoebox of photos and letters that referenced a British man called Marek. Only recently had she stumbled upon one of Eleanor's inquiries in an archive listing. She suspected a connection, but hadn't realized just how deep it might go until she saw the identical photograph. The taxi stopped in front of an apartment building not far from the city center. Inside, Anna's flat was modest but welcoming, filled with books and a few pictures of Anna's own daughter, now grown and living abroad. They sat at a small dining table, not unlike the one in Eleanor's cottage, and shared a pot of black tea along with steaming plates of pierogi. Though a stranger by every definition, Anna had an undeniable air of familiarity, like a reflection of something Eleanor once knew. They spoke haltingly at first, circled around the edges of their personal histories. Anna described how her mother met this British man in 1947. He had been stationed in Krakow as some kind of trade liaison, though Anna suspected it was a cover story for espionage work. Danuta was young then, just over 20, and had survived the war with scars both visible and hidden. Merrick, who sometimes slipped and spoke with an English accent, told Danuta he had lost everything back home. They lived together for nearly 2 years in a small rented flat. Then, in 1949, he was taken by Soviet authorities. No one saw him again, and official records were non-existent or contradictory. Anna grew up hearing only fragments. Her mother rarely spoke of Merrick. She just kept photographs hidden away. Eleanor listened, her cup trembling in her hand. She thought of how she had spent those same years searching in vain, convinced that if William were alive, he would have found her. But if he had been trapped in a hostile environment, forcibly recruited or constantly watched, maybe he truly had no way out. She managed to ask about the baby in the photo. Anna explained that Danuta gave birth to a son who died in infancy before Anna was born. That child's face was the one in the old black and white picture. Anna herself came along later after the war ended, though the timeline was murky. "He was not my father in a legal sense," Anna said softly. "But my mother always spoke of him as if he were." They spent the entire evening sifting through the shoebox, pulling out photo after photo. Some were duplicates of what Eleanor had. Others were new, showing William or Merrick, laughing with Danuta, standing in front of a cafe in Krakow, or playing a violin in a dimly lit room. Eleanor's eyes welled when she recognized that violin. She had given one to William as a wedding gift, something he cherished. She saw the same instrument in these photos, thousands of miles from Yorkshire. Anna paused over one picture that showed Danuta cradling an infant. The child's hair had the same gentle curl that Eleanor herself had as a girl. It was eerie, a sense of lineage passing unspoken across continents. Then Anna revealed that there were more letters in that shoebox, many unopened or too damaged to read. One, however, was addressed to someone with the initials EH dated March 1951. Anna admitted she never knew what it meant until she saw Eleanor's name. Eleanor could hardly breathe. One morning, a letter arrived, German postmarks. The handwriting was spidery and cautious. Inside, Marta's concise words thanked Helen for sending the package. There was no lengthy explanation, no emotional outpouring, just a short line. He tried to help her. "I believe that. Thank you for understanding." Beneath the text, Marta had drawn a small heart. Helen gripped the paper with trembling hands. A wave of warmth spread across her chest, as if a gentle door had opened. Yet the more Helen reflected, the clearer it became that the quiet that shrouded Jack's story wasn't merely about love or shame. It was about survival in a world defined by lines on a map. She thought of Anna, stepping through a labyrinth of Soviet offices, forging documents to save others. She thought of the risk Jack must have taken by associating with her. She wondered how many times he planned to reveal the truth, but chose silence instead, convinced that telling Helen would only place a burden on her heart. When Emily came by later that week, Helen showed her Marta's letter. Emily read it twice, pressing her lips tight. "I'm still angry at him," she admitted, setting the page down. "I can't help it. I wish he'd told us. Even if it was painful, I wish I could have known him fully." Helen understood. "I know. Me too. But he must have believed this was the only way." Emily only nodded, tears in her eyes. Then she surprised Helen by leaning forward and pulling her into a firm hug. In that silent embrace, Helen felt some of the tension dissolve. They remained that way, mother and daughter, bound by love and the hollowness left by Jack's hidden life. Some days later, a distant cousin from out of state called Helen after hearing rumors of another child. Helen hesitated, measuring her words. "We don't know if that boy was Jack's son," she said truthfully. "But there was a child named Lucas he cared about." The cousin pried with questions. Was it an affair? Did Jack lead a double life? Helen's patience wore thin, but she remained calm. She realized people love gossip more than truth. "We only know that a bond existed and it mattered," she said, then ended the call. Alone in the study, she stared at the wedding photo with the Dresden picture tucked behind it. She recalled the feel of Jack's coat draped over her shoulders on chilly nights. Had he thought of Lucas each time he held their own children? Had he felt an unspoken guilt, some primal sense of failing that child across the ocean? The layers of regret and devotion tangled in her mind. That evening, she found herself placing an old map on the desk, one that showed the lines of East and West Germany before reunification. She traced the border with a fingertip, imagining Jack in uniform, crossing from one zone to another, glancing over his shoulder. Fear must have been constant. A single misstep could mean imprisonment or worse. Perhaps Anna had been discovered forging those documents. Perhaps Jack was forced to leave or threatened. The letter indicated he tried to keep them all safe, even if it meant severing contact. As the weeks turned into months, Helen kept volunteering at the local archive. She helped catalog documents from that era, scanning them and labeling digital files so researchers could access them. Now and then, she stumbled on references to foreign soldiers stationed in Dresden. She found rosters with partial names, time-stamped records of those who were assigned to collaborate with local administrative offices. She searched for Jack's name among them, but never found anything conclusive. At times, the absence felt like a quiet validation that the official story had been scrubbed. The deeper she looked, the more she realized how many personal histories had been erased or permanently sealed. There were nights when she lay awake, remembering the hush of the plane as she flew to Dresden. She recalled Marta's voice describing how Anna vanished. She pictured the old envelope with Jack's scrawled apology. She found an odd sense of purpose in that memory. By carrying on his silent confession, she was, in a way, allowing his intentions to be heard. If he had believed secrecy was the only shield, then she, now free from that danger, could unearth the truth without fear of retribution. At times, though, the weight of what she found would press down so heavily that she felt her breath catch. She would sit by the window, trying to push away the flicker of an image. A small boy, fatherless, longing for a letter that never came. She remembered Marta describing Lucas's final years, how he died so young. She wondered if, had Lucas lived longer, Jack might have broken his silence. Would father and son have met one day? It was the kind of question that had no answer, and it left her feeling hollow. Yet the gloom didn't last forever. Helen sensed a slow, cautious growth in her own spirit. She began to see Jack's legacy not just in his silence but in the kindness he showed in that old photograph. He had risked much to be with Anna and Lucas in those fleeting moments. Even though the era's politics pulled them apart, the tenderness in that black-and-white image was real. It wasn't a betrayal of Helen and Emily. It was an act of a man trying to do right in a world that didn't allow easy truths. One afternoon, as she sorted through the last of Jack's boxes, she found a small note he had scrawled to himself on a scrap of paper. Likely a puzzle clue or a line of poetry. All it said was, "We carry the secrets we must." She traced the letters with her fingertip, tears stinging her eyes. It felt like a message from beyond, a private confession of how heavy those secrets had been. Emily came over that same day, her children in tow. They raced around the living room with toy trucks while Emily busied herself in the kitchen. Helen joined her by the stove, offering to help chop vegetables. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated by the squeals of the little ones. They were the next generation, untouched by the shadows of the Cold War. Helen suddenly felt grateful that life could move forward, that children could run free without a curfew imposed by foreign soldiers or fear of hidden informants. When the meal was nearly ready, Emily leaned against the counter and sighed. "Sometimes I feel like I barely knew Dad," she admitted. "This last couple of months have been disorienting." Helen set down the knife and turned to her. "I think we knew him in the ways he wanted us to. He was still our Jack, still the man who taught you to ride a bike, who collected baseball cards, who insisted on the same brand of coffee every morning." She paused, voice trembling. "He was just more than that, too." Emily nodded, her eyes glassy with tears. "I wish he had been able to tell us," she said softly. So I could have told him it was okay to have a past, to have regrets. Helen hugged her. I think he knew in his own way. Maybe he just couldn't bear the risk that came with telling us everything. They set the table and called the children in, the air around them gentler than it had been in weeks. Over dinner, Emily's kids chattered about friends at school, about weekend plans, about cartoons they liked. Helen listened with a certain peace. She felt that, despite the heartbreak, her family was still whole, perhaps cracked at the edges, but not shattered. One cold morning, Roger arrived to find her still in bed, unresponsive. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The shock of her absence reverberated through the little cottage. Relatives gathered for a small funeral at the local church, where pale sunlight filtered through stained glass onto the pews. As people arrived, they murmured soft words of condolence, remembering Eleanor as a kind soul who had quietly weathered 2 husbands' passings and a lifetime of unspoken sorrow. Partway through the service, the doors opened, and Anna Kowalska stepped inside, accompanied by a young woman, her daughter. They had flown in from Warsaw upon hearing of Eleanor's death. Their appearance caused a brief stir, as most mourners had no idea who they were. Roger, who knew bits of the story, greeted them gently. Anna approached the casket, her eyes shining with tears. In her hands, she held the small photo album she had assembled for Eleanor, wrapped in plain paper for protection. She placed it beside the casket, tucking it near a sprig of lavender and the worn bow for William's violin. The solemn hush deepened. It felt as though, in that moment, they had connected the final thread in a tapestry of hidden history. When the service ended, mourners drifted outside into the soft Yorkshire drizzle. Anna found a bench beneath an old oak tree, its branches bare in the winter chill. Roger joined her, his expression uncertain. They spoke in hushed voices about what Eleanor meant to them both, how she had bridged the gap between 2 worlds. Anna admitted she never fully understood Marek, William, and likely never would. But she was grateful Eleanor had come to Poland, that she had learned the truth before it was too late. They lingered there, letting the drizzle soak into their coats. Anna's daughter stood at a distance, respectful, sensing the gravity of the moment. Finally, they returned to the church, where the violin case waited near the entrance. Anna kneeled down, carefully lifting the lid. Inside, the violin rested, still holding the faint scent of rosin. Atop the velvet lining lay a folded note in Eleanor's graceful handwriting. Anna picked it up and read, "Some loves never leave, they just take longer paths home." Anna's hands trembled as she realized Eleanor must have placed it there just before she died. She glanced at Roger, who was watching in silence. Gently, she closed the violin case. She rose to her feet and walked toward the front of the church, setting the case beneath a stained glass window depicting a dove in flight. It felt like a small, final gesture, returning William's beloved instrument to a place of peace. The hush of the church enveloped them all. No words were spoken. None were needed. Anna took one last look at the case, then turned and walked through the heavy wooden doors into the rain, her daughter at her side. There was no grand farewell, no attempt to sum up the story with perfect clarity. All that mattered was that Eleanor had dared to follow the truth to the very end, piecing together the life of a man she once loved. Outside, the drizzle soaked the old gravestones, the gray sky leaning low over Yorkshire fields. The memory of William hardly lingered in that damp air, brushing gently against those who chose to remember. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.